for being the producer. There we go. Keeping her dad straight. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today as we talk about peace in the land. Is peace at hand in the Middle East? That is what President Trump says. And a lot of people are giving him a lot of credit. And I must say, he's done something that we have not seen done up until this point. He certainly did at least bring about a cessation of some hostilities in Gaza. We haven't talked about the West Bank, but certainly in Gaza. And so, what does that mean? Who has oversight over this new Gaza, this project? And do a sovereign people need oversight or do they need statehood? I want to know what all of this means. What does this 20-point peace deal actually mean? What does it mean? How can Palestinians be made whole? When the president spoke at the Knesset today, he really didn't mention Palestinians at all. And they are going home. And some press reports have said they're going home to nothing. That's not true. They're going home to destruction, but they are going home. They're going home to untold tens of thousands. Estimates really put it at least a couple of 100,000 people underneath the rubble. That's according to the Lancet study, one of the most credible medical journals on earth. So we need to talk about what really has been put into motion here. I mean, President Erdogan of Turkey refused to go to the Arab summit in Egypt if Prime Minister Netanyahu was there, but he's been declared a war criminal. So his presence there would have been problematic for a lot of people, certainly for the Arab community. There are so many places in the world as a war criminal that he cannot go. And all of these presidents, including the monarchs, really do, they are able to stay in power because people allow them to remain in power. So what does that mean? Is peace at hand, everybody? Is peace at hand? What about the business benefits that the president talked about? But we didn't hear a lot about the humanitarian crisis facing the Palestinian people right now. Let's take it all in. Let's take it all in. From people who study it, people who have relatives in it, people close on the ground. I want you to meet me on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social, at Santita J. That's where I am on X. The Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, which is where a few of you are now. Please like and share, like and share, like and share, and like and subscribe as well. The Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. I share it with a guy I know, Reverend Jesse Jackson. He has a Facebook page. We're streaming there as well. The Santita Jackson Show on X. Boy, I'm all over the place. And Instagram, Santita Jackson IG. Whew. Of course, Rania Patrice, a Palestinian American activist and nationally renowned Democratic strategist. She is with us today. I'm very, very, very excited to have her with us, and Dr. Stephen Junis. I'm so glad that you are here with us today. And a special shout out to your beautiful daughter, Nurse Kalila, who is really the professor. I mean, she's the producer here today. So she said, I'm going to get my father up and get him going. And we're going to do this even as he is going into a car. So I'm going to bring on Phyllis Bennis in a hot second. But I want to get things started with you, Rania. What did you make of this peace deal? Do you still have family over there in Gaza, the West Bank? Certainly, I know you know people who are there. What do you make of what this peace deal gives us?
Yeah, I do have friends and colleagues in Gaza, and I actually spent and have continued to spend a lot of time communicating with them on the phone and meetings, and just there is, and people have been seeing it. There is an excitement. There was an immediate excitement on the ground at the notion of a ceasefire, because let's be honest, people are sick of being massacred and shot at, and just genocided all day, every day, never a safe place, never a safe moment, continuously being forcibly displaced, continuously being told to move to this, green zone that's supposed to be safe, only to be bombed and shot at along the way, only to lose countless family members. And of course, people know the metrics now. It's like the largest cohort of child amputees, largest cohort of children who've lost one or both parents. All of this, I mean, devastation that we've watched unfold for 2 years, but reality is nearly 80 years before that too. And so there is this excitement around just some calm. However, it has to be said, this 20-point plan still does not allow for freedom of movement, still does
Mhm.
not allow for aid to be let in at the rate in which it needs to be let in. It still is there. It's not being discussed. I've been told, I actually just had a briefing this morning where it is confirmed that these GHF sites are starting to be shut down, which GHF was just the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was a joke, and they're starting to be shut down. But there's still a fear of aid being privatized, and that is not where the experience lies. There are entities and NGOs that have been doing this for decades and know how to get aid in and how to get it to the people that need it and how to do it effectively and efficiently. So all of these things are still not happening. And in fact, in this briefing I had this morning, one of the briefers said that tons of trucks are coming in. And I had to ask 3 times, what does that mean? What are tons of trucks? Let me tell you, it is 150 trucks that have been let in. And pre 2023, pre October 2023, it was between 500 and 600 trucks a day of food and aid that were going into Gaza. So 150 trucks over the last few days is nothing. It's still nothing. It's more than none, but it's still nowhere near enough. And so and then there's just the reality, as you said in your opening, Santita, who is going to call the shots? Who is going to be in control? And the reality is, if there is going to be any sort of justice, any sort of end to the true suffering, Palestinian people have to be at the center of what happens next. And that has not happened so far. And so, and then of course we have to get into a conversation around accountability and true justice, which is also not being discussed yet. And you've probably seen um, conversations happening around Palestinian people having to negotiate the end of their own genocide, the genocide of their own people. It's really, really unbelievable that it's 2025. It is the most televised, the most live streamed genocide in history, and these things are still happening. And yes, there's a celebration for the bomb stopping, but we're so far from the end. We're so far from the end.
Well, you know what? I want to know what you think, Dr. Judas. What do you make of this?
I I concur with everything that Rania said. Um, the other thing to think about is you know whether Israel will indeed withdraw and how soon. And this is of course related to Hamas's disarmament. On the one hand, I think there would not be a lot of objections among the Palestinians about Hamas disarming, both in the sense that their use of terrorism has been led to terrible consequences, and the malicious thuggery over the years has alienated many Palestinians. At the same time, there are these militias that are, many of which are supported by Israel, that have been wreaking havoc, stealing aid, and there's also a need for some kind of order, because Hamas is not, just an armed resistance group, terrorist group, whatever, but they also are the functioning government of Gaza, or what's left of it, and their ability to control things and keep things in line is important. Um, the other thing, of course, is what kind of governance are they going to have? The basically what the logical people to take over would be the Palestine Authority. I mean, they're corrupt. They have their issues, but they are the recognized government of Palestine um, by over 150 nations. But Israel says, and Trump say, no, you can't. We at best we can give some kind of technocratic Palestinian leadership, but they have to be under the so-called Board of Peace, run by Donald Trump with support of Tony Blair, and some of the names listed are basically these billionaire investors that have very little to do with the Palestinians themselves. I mean, this is a neo-colonial situation. You have to think about it from the perspective of a Palestinian, especially the British, giving the colonial. Think about how Tony Blair was one of the major architects of the invasion of Iraq, and Trump himself was the one who facilitated this genocide through vetoing UN Security Council resolutions, and providing the arms for the killing. Now, having said all this, I mean, I think we do need to be relieved that the bombing has stopped. I mean, for now at least. I mean, that is no small matter. It's a matter. I mean, it's good the Israelis who are being held are released. So I question the use of the word hostage, because frankly, the only ones that were left were soldiers. I mean, usually you consider them POWs. I was reading Newsweek today. They said an Israeli soldier kidnapped from his tank and held hostage. I mean, that's not usually, if the Ukrainians captured a Russian tank commander, that's not usually the language they'd use. But in any case, that's good as happening. It's good. Almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, the vast majority of whom were not involved in any kind of armed resistance, are being released. And this leads to the question, why didn't it happen sooner? I mean, this deal, the similar deal was on the table as far back as May of last year, a year and a half ago, just about. And a similar one in September. Gershon Baskin, a major Israeli negotiator, said, Hamas had agreed to these. All that needed to be doing was to push Netanyahu to agree, but Biden refused, and so Trump finally did push Netanyahu to accept. Though I don't think it's out of any great moral calling. I think, frankly, his buddies in the Gulf monarchies and Sisi and Erdogan basically said, "Hey, look, we've pushed Hamas to compromise in all these ways. It's time for you to push Israel as well. And if you don't, it may threaten this nice strategic, commercial, and personal relationship we developed." So I think that's maybe what helped tip the balance.
You know what? I've got Phyllis Bennis here. She wrote something last week in The Nation. And this piece in The Nation, you could have written it this morning, right after we heard the Trump speech. I mean, it was prescient. I think I'm going to call you Little Isaiah, the prophet. I don't know what else to say, because Trump and Netanyahu's 20-point Gaza ultimatum, it really sounds like an ultimatum. It does not seem, Rania, who is Palestinian American, Dr. Zunis, of course, you know him from the University of San Francisco, Rania Patrice, Democratic strategist, but also a Palestinian American. I need you to lay out for us what it is that, well, you saw it last week, and it played out point for point, just the way that you said that it would. And Palestinians were not even mentioned today. They were talking about the business opportunities. I'm going like this to you. Like, well, I couldn't. I had to watch the speech, Dr. Zunes and Rania, twice. So I said, well, did I miss something? Because I don't want to misspeak, because this is such a tender moment. And a lot of people, Medea Benjamin just said, you know what? I will give him credit for doing something that other people did not do. Does it go far enough? Absolutely not. But what is this 20-point deal? And what are the Palestinians going home to, Phyllis Bennis?
Well, I think what they're not going home to are their homes. They've been displaced, the entire population of Gaza, many of them 3, 4, as many as 10 separate times. The destruction of Gaza is virtually total, somewhere between 80 and 90, depending on which count you use. Buildings have been completely destroyed. Even while we now have had 3 days when the bombs are not falling, and yes, we should be very grateful for that, people are still dying because of the Israeli genocide, because so much of that was now being caused by famine, deliberately imposed famine. And when people are dying of famine, it doesn't get reversed in a day, even if they get some amount of food. It's a very dangerous disease that kills people. So this is not over. This is not over. And you didn't miss anything, Santita, when you were looking at who was present in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, who was not present. Netanyahu was not present because he was not willing to sign on to this deal. Hamas was not present because they were not invited, were not able to come. So the question of what it means that 4 other parties, the US and Qatar and Turkey and Egypt, signed on to a, quote, ceasefire agreement when they're not the ones fighting, other than the fact that the US was providing all the weapons to one side. It doesn't mean that this is over, that this is now anything remotely resembling peace. This is a pause, and we can be grateful because every day that the bombs were falling, somewhere close to 100 Palestinians were being killed by Israeli bombs that came from the United States, paid for by our tax money. That's not happening today or for the last 2 days. And yes, we should be grateful for that.
Well, who decided upon what for whom? I'm confused.
Well, the peace summit was aimed at what comes next. And the notion that you could sign off on a deal about what comes next without the parties being present raises the issue of what is the performative nature of this so-called peace summit. The peace summit signed off on a document which we don't know what it said. We don't know if it was the 20 points that Trump had originally proposed, although what was signed off by Israel and Hamas in the recent days were just 6 points that covered just the basics of stopping the attacks, allowing in some amount of food, and the exchange of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners unlawfully detained for years, for the 20 living hostages and the 28 bodies of hostages that have not yet been found. 4 of them were found, the others not yet. But this is supposedly designed to follow up on implementation without any representation of the forces on the ground, the people on the ground whose lives are now being followed up on and figured out governance without the Palestinians themselves having anything to say about it. So this is a false peace summit. This is not about peace. This is, as you said earlier, and as Stephen Zunas said earlier, this is about business. This is about the same deals that Steve Witkoff's, the special envoy of Trump, that his son has been negotiating along with Trump's son-in-law to engage with the leadership of the Gulf states to win in massive billion-dollar investments in their investment companies, where they have gotten from the sovereign wealth funds of Saudi Arabia, of the UAE. They're trying from Qatar. Qatar has given a plane. We don't know yet if they're also giving investment money to the sons and sons-in-law. So all of this is about the business that is going to go forward. And what is going to become of Gaza apparently is not going to be anything that in which the people of Gaza are going to be consulted. The question of the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza was not in the agreement that was signed to. And it's, as far as we know, not in the new agreement that was reached today in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt without the people of Gaza, without Israel signing on to it. So this is what they are talking about when they talk about the new Gaza and the new Middle East. This is something where, as Trump said today when he met with the Israeli Knesset, he said, all the countries that signed the Abraham Accords, that's in reference to the Arab states that have agreed to normalize relations with Israel without Israel having to end the occupation and the apartheid system. He said all of the countries that signed the Abraham Accords remained in the pact during the war. They stayed because of loyalty, and they stayed because it was really good business. That's true. What else he said that was true remains a question. But that line that they stayed in the Abraham Accords while genocide was killing tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza was because it was, to Trump quote, really good business.
How is it that these sons, Jared Kushner, Witkoff's son, how is it that they could conduct business and diplomacy at the same time?
Well, it's only illegal if someone holds you accountable for it. The line around the son-in-law, around Jared Kushner, is that he doesn't work for the government. He's not on a government salary. So it has nothing to do with anything, that he is simultaneously engaging in massive business agreements, deals, getting investment money in the billions of dollars from the sovereign wealth funds. These are not from individual Saudis or individual Emiratis. This is money from the governments, from the sovereign wealth funds of those countries that are being invested in their investment company here in the US. They have a joint company, the son-in-law and the son. For Witkoff's son, I assume it's the same argument. Witkoff has claimed that he's almost finished with providing making the arrangements for putting his assets in a blind trust, where he will no longer be making a profit from this. But if anybody believes that somehow answers the problem here, it certainly does not. So, we're looking at a very dangerous moment in which an agreement is being signed by all these countries, which will allow for what's called an international stabilization force, not a protection force. We should be very clear. There have been people lately calling for a protection force, which would be a very good thing if it could happen. But this is not that. This is not a protection force. This is a, quote, stabilization force whose mandate is to be sure that Israel and Egypt are protected from having any kind of resistance from inside Gaza affect them. It's protection not of Palestinians, it's protection of Israelis and Egyptians. So we have that part of it. We have a situation where Israel does not have to pull out of Gaza. It will have to move from one area within Gaza to another area, but it is not being required to pull its soldiers out. We know that Netanyahu has already said no to a Palestinian state. So the fact that the original 20-point plan from Trump said that in the future there might be a pathway to something looking like a Palestinian state. We've had 30 years of a pathway to a Palestinian state in Oslo, and we know what that led to. It led to nothing. It led to nothing. There was no Palestinian state. We don't know how the demilitarization of Hamas will or will not take place. Hamas has not signed on to that agreement. We don't know how this so-called international stabilization force is going to take power or when it might. And until it does, apparently no Palestinian technocratic grouping, which was one of the things being talked to about who would monitor day-to-day life in Gaza, who would be part of that, who would get to choose. Would the people of Gaza be able to elect their own technocrats? Nobody has indicated that. It looks like they will be appointed by this international oversight board, the Peace Board, led by, wait for it, Donald Trump, and with the CEO being, wait for it, Tony Blair. And somehow we're supposed to forget what their histories are. We're supposed to forget Tony Blair's role in the occupation of Iraq. So all of this is designed to be put off until later. The important part was, and it is true, the important part immediately was to stop the bombing in Gaza and allow in the food, medicine, shelter, all the things that have been denied for the last 2 years, and to release the prisoners and the hostages. All of that is very important. And it's a very good thing that that is happening today. But what we see going forward is a very, very dangerous moment.
Just to hold on one moment, Phyllis Bennett and Dr. Zunas, because I have a Palestinian American on with us. And I want to know, is there a sense that the Arab countries as they've signed on to the Abraham Accords, as they've cut business deals with your sensible opponents, if not enemies, is there a sense of betrayal?
Yes, daily. Um, I mean, and it's not even it's not even veiled, you know. It's blatant, and it's for a number of different reasons. I mean, Egypt, the funding that Egypt gets the second most funding from the United States, only behind Israel. Jordan is, you know, there's all these dealings that are going on. The normalization was a betrayal in and of itself. And then the thing I always have to remind myself, frankly, and the rest of us about is the people in these countries are with us. They are with us. And per the usual, the governments are the ones that are really causing the harm. I mean, I feel like we can say that about our own country too, obviously. Um, and we all know, and you know, the professor Zuna said this too, like it didn't start with Trump. Obviously, Joe Biden had plenty of opportunities to step up and step in and stop this. And you know, I think all of us, if we heard one more time how he was working tirelessly behind the scenes, we were just going to lose it. um I do think it's important to name that. But yes, there is a massive sense of betrayal, and also a constant reminder that the people really are with us. I spend a lot of, you know, Morocco is another country where they normalized relations and they signed the accords. I've been to more pro-Palestine protests in Morocco than I have in the United States, actually. And it's just these constant reminders that the people are with us and their governments are not representing the will of the people. I feel the need to say this because this is not new, but we're seeing it play out again today, where every media outlet is saying Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners.
Mhm.
One, I think maybe the Washington Post actually named that they called them Palestinian prisoners, but said that they were being held without any charge or due process. Um, I have to name this because it is nearly 80 years of continued dehumanization that we're even seeing today. The other thing I have to say is that there are threats against Palestinian families. This happened the last time there was a hostage exchange too. Threats against Palestinian families and loved ones who, if they were caught celebrating the release of their loved ones. I also just have to say, the professor was talking about the PA. You know, the leadership, the PA is essentially an extension of the Israeli government. And we all know that. All of us who have lived there, worked there, have family there, etc., we all know that. And the reality is, one of the people who was on the list and the Israeli government continues to play games with him. He is consistently the most popular leader among Palestinian people in the north and in the territories, is Marwan Barghouti. He was supposed to be part of this deal. They pulled him out. They're playing this game. Ben Gavir went in. I mean, again, went in and yelled at him for this performative, like, again, continued dehumanization. So we hear this narrative over and over and over again from the US, the UK, and all these other countries, as well as from the Israeli government. No, there's no leadership. No, because they imprison our leaders, the people who are actually unifying figures. They throw in jail and they disappear them on purpose. That is the intent. And Marwan is just one of many who were unifying figures, elected officials and just leaders in the Palestinian community who were imprisoned and disappeared and not given any due process. All of these things, again, Marwan himself has been in prison for 23 years. Um, and no one can see him. The last time any of us saw him public on video was when Ben Gavir went in and did that whole dog and pony show, as he does. And and yet Marwan is in prison, and Ben Gavir, who is an actual war criminal, is out walking and wagging his finger in our faces. It's really incredible. And then, sorry, one more thing, and then I promise I'm going to stop. The fact that this whole peace summit, you hit the nail on the head. It was performative. None of those countries have to sign on to this deal. That is not a necessary action for this deal to take place. This was all performative action for Donald Trump and the rest of them to feel good about themselves. And it's not necessary, does not center Palestinians. And as has been said multiple times now, even the mention of Palestinians and Palestinian leadership is not actually happening in an honest way.
One thing that does kind of give me a little bit of hope that deserves mentioning is that I think there would not be a ceasefire at all were it not, I believe, for the role of civil society. Now, I mentioned the pressure that the Arab states and maybe Turkey had put on Trump to get him to finally pressure Netanyahu. But I think that another factor is the growing recognition by more pragmatic people in the Israeli and American establishment that both countries were increasingly isolated in the international community, and that was hurting them. That the European countries, the EU, were talking seriously the first time about not just military sanctions. Most European countries have imposed military sanctions on Israel earlier, but actually economic sanctions that would also really bite. And they would have been made, even these belated gestures, were it not for the massive protests
Okay.
and
Hang on.
organizing that went a lot of attention. So I think we need to. Important right now, I think, is given the role that civil society played, I believe, in finally getting a ceasefire. It can also play a role in exposing the sham of the stuff that's followed and pushing those to really create a situation where Palestinians actually have a voice in their own future.
But see, Phyllis Venice, this was the disconnect that I was seeing in the corporate media today. Palestinian hostages, Israeli hostages, Palestinian prisoners. When Rania said that they really have been forbidden from celebrating. My father talked about growing up in the Jim Crow South, and if Joe Louis won a boxing match, or if a Black person won anything, their side of town had to be quiet. Because if they beat a white opponent, they risked the ire. Their lives were at risk.
It's a very good parallel. The only difference, I think, is that the Israelis make it public. They announce it, that it is prohibited for Palestinian families to celebrate the release of their loved ones. And any families who do face the possibility of the rearrest of the person who was just released, the arrest of other family members, or the demolition of their home. All of these have been carried out. So this is just one more example. This is why it's so important that we see this as an important pause in the assault, which is very important, and allowing in the food, which is very important, and releasing the hostages on both sides, because these people who were picked up, the almost 2,000 who have been held without trial, without charges, without being accused of anything, were being held as hostages, as trading chips. That's why they were picked up. That's why the Israelis wanted them. Now they've done their job. They were exchanged for the Israeli hostages. Now they can be released, but to be sure, there is no celebration. But I think there's one other thing that I just wanted to add to Stephen's important point about civil society, which I think is right, and on a global level. The fact that so many European countries are now talking about support for a Palestinian state, which in my view means very little. There's no land left for a Palestinian state at this stage, regardless of what anybody wants. But it was an important thing because it showed that those governments, from Spain to Italy to across Europe, this has been true in the global South for a long time, but now it was happening in Europe, that they were hearing the pressure from their own populations. Similarly to other countries, where, like in the Arab world, the populations are demanding that something change, that their governments stop collaborating with a genocide. And that's partly what we're seeing here. And I think there is a model we can look at. We can look at the model of the anti-apartheid movement around South Africa from the 1980s, when you saw a very similar situation of a few brave governments trying to raise the issues in the Security Council being vetoed over and over again when they would try to impose sanctions. But they would then go to the General Assembly. The General Assembly would say, they would pass huge resolutions with enormous, big majorities. And the US would say, well, we don't care because those are not considered legally binding. So we're going to ignore it. But eventually, one country after another began to impose those sanctions, even though it wasn't binding. Individual countries would do it. And eventually, enough countries had done it, including key US allies, that the US isolation became too great. And they were forced to allow the powerful anti-apartheid movement in the United States, in which your father, of course, played a major role, along with the Black Church in general and the Black Caucus of the Congress. That movement won. And we were able to finally impose those sanctions on apartheid South Africa. The problem we have faced around Palestine right now is in that very similar situation. We can't wait the 10 years that it took to change the situation in South Africa because people were dying of a genocide. If this ceasefire holds for even a few months, that might be long enough to change that situation where enough countries will be imposing sanctions to stop Israeli genocide and stop Israeli apartheid and stop sending weapons and stop allowing the weapons to be transferred through their ports. That will make a real change that will be permanent. That's the moment that we now may face.
Well, Phyllis, do the Palestinians even have a government? I mean, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, who's in charge here?
As Rania put it, there's not a whole lot of support for the existing governing authorities. They never had much authority from the time they were elected back in 2006. Hamas won the election in Gaza and in parts of the West Bank. The West Bank was then taken over by the PA. Ultimately, Hamas took over where they had won in Gaza, but neither had actual power to govern. They had power to organize the street cleaners and figure out which schools would open at what times. They had what we might call municipal authority. They had no power. They were designed to make sure that Israel stayed safe. They were not allowed, for example, to control their own borders, who came in and out, what goods came in or out, controlling their own water. The vast majority of the water in what is now Israel comes from sources within what is now known as the West Bank. So when they built the wall made sure that the water sources were on the Israeli side. That wasn't something that the PA was able to prevent. They had no real power. So the question of who's governing doesn't really mean very much, I think, to Palestinians right now. Rania, of course, can speak to this more directly from what people are saying on the ground.
So then what does a state mean?
A state is not being discussed in terms of a sovereign state. No one is talking about two equal states, even in the performative discourse that we hear, two states, living side by side. We're talking about one state, Israel, with control of its borders, control of its economy, control of its airspace, control of its water, control of everything around it, control of all of it, and a non-state, what amounts to a Bantustan, which would have municipal authority, but would not control its own borders, would not control its own economy, would not control its own electrical access, would not control water, would not control anything. It would not be a sovereign state. It would not be allowed to have a military to protect its own people.
Stephen Jonas, was this a win?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Was this a win? I mean, because now there's
only in the limited but vitally important area of stopping the genocide for now, and given the severity of the human suffering, we shouldn't downplay its importance, but but it seems that unless we look at this fundamental question, and that is the denial of Palestinians their basic rights, their right to statehood, their right to equality, their right to access to food, water, to movement, to the basic things that every human being has the right to. I mean, I think one thing, again, I'm trying, yeah, I'm grasping at opportunities for hope here, is that the genocide has raised consciousness, raised awareness to an unprecedented level about Israel and about the massive killing. That people are not just questioning Israeli policies, they are questioning Zionism itself. They are questioning the whole system, and they're learning the history. That we're moving to a stage where I think some of these questions that a lot of people were afraid to discuss are finally being discussed. And so let's the trap, and I think Phyllis and Rania have been very eloquent in pointing them out, that let's not allow Trump to have this big victory lap. Let's not allow them to oppose a kind of disaster capitalism on the people of Gaza. Let's not allow them to continue a process where the Palestinians are not full and equal participants. So I guess celebrate would be too strong a word, but there's certainly the extraordinary relief that the slaughter is ended for now. But let's not rest. Let's keep organizing. Let's keep talking. Let's keep educating. Let's keep pressing for change in our government's policies, and not let up just because the worst of the killing has ended for now.
Well, Phyllis, before I pivot to Ronnie, let me ask you this. I want you to answer Be Tell Fair, who asked, why do I see the making of a resort?
Well, this was, of course, Trump's original idea, was to make official the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza, the kind of ethnic cleansing that has been going on slowly for the last 55 years, but moved to a much quicker rate in the last 2 years. And that what he saw and what his son-in-law talked about was we see a beautiful piece of seaside real estate. And we're going to build, as Trump put it, the Riviera on the Mediterranean. The problem is Israel faces a reality that it has never been willing to acknowledge, which is that the country that it created was not based on a land without a people. It was a populated land, and it still is. The efforts at ethnic cleansing, which happened in the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, with the creation of the state, when 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their land, and to this day have still never been allowed to return. That was supposed to now happen with Gaza. But it turned out the people of Gaza had a different idea that did not include being expelled from their land again. They are still there. That's why there's not going to be some Western-style beach resort with people sipping drinks on the shores that are now the burial place of so many Palestinian children. That's not on the agenda of the people who happen to live there. So I think this is a very different moment. I think we are dealing with a different reality here in the United States. The recent polls this last week were shocking in many ways, how things have changed, where we have 75% of Democratic voters saying no more military aid to Israel, and 66% of independents, and even 37% of Republicans, all saying no more military aid. We see the change in the Jewish community, where 39% of American Jewish voters, are now saying Israel is committing genocide. 61% of Jewish voters saying Israel has committed war crimes. It's an astonishing thing. 50% of young Jews saying Israel is committing genocide. Yes, it's a genocide. So this is a different scenario here in the United States. This is not any longer the reality when members of Congress had to worry about criticizing Israel somehow being equated with political suicide. They are rapidly approaching the day when not criticizing Israel is going to be political suicide.
Yeah, because I look back, and this is not aggrandizing. I was just there. I told you I leaned over to my father and I kissed him. Well, I do that a lot, but I leaned over and I said, And he said, well, I said, Daddy, let me just kiss you. He looked at me because I'd kiss Daddy. I said, either you're the craziest man in the world or the bravest. I'm not so sure. He said, what does that mean? I said, well, I don't know how you ran for president talking about Israeli security and Palestinian justice. I mean, and we ran through anti-Semitism. You know, you were there, Phyllis.
Maybe he was both.
Stephen Zunis, you know
I was
that.
there.
Maybe
Yep.
he was
But
both.
it wasn't just him who was labeled. It was Carolyn Kasdan. It was Bob Borsaj. Wait a minute. Because I was there. I know it was you. I mean, I'm saying
Yeah.
it's you. Now, hold it. You were self-loathing. And you were
Right.
like, I'm just trying to make a difference here because you all saw then, and help me to understand this, because I have to tell you, my mother said when Yasser Arafat came to my parents' home for dinner in Washington, she said, I kind of have to give my daughter the credit or the blame for this. She met you when she was about 14 at the World Youth Festival, and she came back so excited. And he had invited me to Lebanon, and my parents said, well, that would be a no. But my mother said, I will go since you're so enthusiastic, because my parents trusted me, even at that age. I'd seen so much. And when my mother got back, she had to stay in Paris, I told you, for a week because she was so shaken. Someone drives you to a site, and when you come back, you have a new driver because the driver you had was killed on the way back. It's just, what has shifted? And I have to ask you and Stephen that before I
Yeah.
go back to Ronnie. What has shifted? Because things have shifted to me so radically, in a really relatively short period of time. Everybody.
I think there are a number of things. I think one, of course, is the brutality of the Israeli government and its actions have reached new heights. At least under the labor governments, they could pretend they were interested in territorial compromise, but under the current government, they don't even pretend, and the racism is much more overt than it was before. The fact that the young people are shifting. I mean, when I was growing up, and Phyllis and I growing up, Israel was the darling of the liberal establishment. Now it's the darling of the Christian right. And so if you're a young person, you're developing your political views, who would you tend to follow? Also, many of us, though we're very critical of Israel, even those critical of Israeli policies, saw Zionism, at least in part, as a national liberation movement for an oppressed people. Today, increasing numbers of people, particularly young, see it through a lens of settler colonialism. And of course, those who've been moved by their understanding through the Black Lives Matter movement and the more of institutionalized racism, again, you see Israel through that lens. We're in a more diverse society. There are as many Muslims as there are Jews in the United States. So people have Muslim friends, not just Jewish friends. Indeed, we have a larger percentage of people who are people of color, who identify more with the struggles in the global South. And the nationalism is seen less as a necessary. I mean, people see, the nationalism as current Zionism is manifest is much more like the nationalism of Orban or Putin or Milosevic or some of the more or Trump, in the far right parties of Europe, the Islamophobic, racist, openly. Again, this is not the plucky kibbutzniks and the socialist ideals that the labor Zionists tried to project. So all these reasons, and finally, we're seeing what's happening unfiltered by the major news media, the mainstream news media that has traditionally been pro-Israel, not as extreme as it used to be, but definitely sees things through a pro-Israel lens mostly. Whereas more and more people, especially young people, can get it directly on their phones. They see the genocide unfolding, unfiltered. And so I think for all these reasons and more, there really has been a qualitative shift that is going to eventually manifest itself in changing U.S. policy. The question is, how many people are going to have to die first?
Phyllis.
I would agree with all of that. I would only add the question of movements. In my new book, I talked about the two different movements. We've had for decades a strong Palestinian rights movement that has fought to change the the public assumptions about Israel in this country. And then suddenly, when the genocide began, within just a few weeks, another movement appeared in parallel. It was not all entirely created by the Palestinian rights movement, although they played a role, but the ceasefire movement that was far broader, involved people that had never paid attention to Israel-Palestine, all kinds of people that were pouring into the streets for all the reasons that Stephen said and more. They were seeing what a genocide looks like close up and personal 24/7, and their children were talking about it. What we now have, we saw the uncommitted voters, 750,000 voters ultimately, who voted not, who were Democratic voters who did not vote for the Democratic candidate because of Gaza and wanted to make that statement. You know, all of this has played a huge role. And we've seen the rise of the understanding among young people who did come to political consciousness in the era of Black Lives Matter and the era of the murder of George Floyd, that just as then, for people who were coming to consciousness in 2019, 2020, in that period, that the issue of racial justice became the moral core of political life. Now, Gaza has become the moral core of political identity for young people across this country. And that's an extraordinary shift that we've never seen before. And it's what gives me hope.
Ronnie, Patrice, what do you want our takeaway to be as a Palestinian American? I think, quite frankly, as human beings who are American, who come at this great human project from a lot of different spaces. Let me just put it there, okay? Because I can appreciate that journey that you shared with me, Phyllis, from where you started to how you got over here. You know, just how you were coming of age in the post-World War II era. You know, there's some things that my father and mother carry that my brothers and I, and let alone their children, they don't carry. So it's young Jewish kids and young Muslim kids and young Black kids. All these kids are at the front of the line. We saw them at the schools and in the streets, on Palestine, on Black Lives Matter, on everything, on all of this. I mean, the world has shifted. Ronnie, what do you want us to know, and what do you want us to have as the takeaway? You know, because I just saw Rashida Tlaib when I was in Washington, and I asked her about her grandmother. She said, you know, she just passed because she was in the West Bank, but it was not related to this. She said, you know, she had lived a long, full life. But I said, oh, wow. I said, I pray for her constantly. Because, you know, when I would see her arguing passionately, Dr. Eunice and Phyllis and Ronnie, I said, you know, she's got a grandmama over there. You know, my grandmother was in South Carolina. Whenever a storm came, I was nervous. I was scared because I was like, because she wouldn't leave South Carolina for anything. But I'm like, you live on top of a hill, Lord have mercy. This is, you know. So Ronnie, what do you want us to know? Just as we go into this, we're going into another kind of moment. Ronnie, I think she's still on mute. Oh, well, let me ask you, Stephen Junis, and then I'll have you close this out, Phyllis, because I want everyone to get your book, Understanding Palestine and Israel. I mean, it really does. Well, first of all, you make it digestible. Because it's a very complex issue, and it's written compassionately, but I can understand it. And so I want to thank you for that. Let me start with you, Dr. Eunice, because you all are really veterans in this struggle. You predate me, quite frankly. And I want you to be able to share with people, contextualize for us what we're watching.
I think that while there are certainly unique aspects and what some people would say complex aspects to this, and I think while it's fine to have what some people might call more radical critiques of and propose policies and solutions than others, I think fundamentally what we're looking at here is not just an assault on the Palestinian people, but an assault on the whole fundamental liberal order of post-World War II international law, when countries can engage in genocide, would engage in apartheid, which can expand their territories by force and colonize people. I mean, that was supposed to be something that was over as a result of the international treaties and laws and the UN Charter, Fourth Geneva Convention, and everything. That was passed 75 years ago, and so I think it underscores that we really do need to recognize that even those who might not be able to critique Zionism yet, to just point out that this with that there's a lot more at stake here. Indeed, the whole fundamental liberal order that people fought and died for in World War II, and that as inadequate as it is on certain levels, needs to be upheld if society, if the international community, if the global order can continue.
I encourage everyone to get Phyllis Bennis's latest book, Understanding Palestine and Israel. If you want to understand it, my father squeezed my hand several times. He said, "You need to read this book." I said, we need to read the book." He said, "Absolutely." He got that out for me, bless his heart. And because I read the book to him, quite frankly. And I think that gave us a chance to talk. I was, with the voice that he still has left. God bless him. Help me to understand, and I'm going to have Rania close us out. You tell me, with using your book as a frame and looking at the moment that we're in, help me to understand where we are now that we have this peace deal. I put that in quotation marks. And now that we have people finally getting fed, maybe, and people going home and lifting up rocks and finding loved ones, or the remains of them. It's just a lot. Help me to understand what we're looking at and where we are. I hope Rania can get back, because I know this has been painful for her, and I know it's painful for everyone. But Phyllis,
it's particularly painful for Palestinians whose families are there.
Absolutely.
I think where we are, Santita, is not so different on the question of Palestine, ironically. It's far worse than anything anyone alive has ever seen. And we have a bigger responsibility because our government is responsible for what is happening, to make sure that this, what is right now a short-term ceasefire, becomes a long-term reality. That's one thing. That all the necessary food and medicine and shelter that has been denied for so long gets in permanently. And recognize that we are waging that fight right now at a moment when we are part of a much bigger fight, which is the fight against the rise of authoritarianism and fascism in this country as well as globally. And I think that what we are seeing is a recognition that we were not prepared for that fight. We weren't clear that the existing institutions that we had from before were not going to be enough. It turned out they were not enough to protect us. And we're having to build movements again that will fight simultaneously for not just Palestinian rights, but Palestinian lives at this moment, and the lives of immigrants in this country that are being threatened on a daily basis, and the lives of poor people who are about to lose massive amounts of health care and access to necessary food, education, all those things, in the context of a genocide which still threatens in Palestine. So we are now part of something much bigger. And I'll end with just a quick story from a few weeks ago, where there was an amazing protest here in DC against the occupation of DC by the National Guard and the ICE and other national officials. And on the march, it was a great march. It was a real mix of all kinds of people from this city who care about this city, who are opposing the occupation of this city. And at one point, the march sort of stalled because it had to merge into a narrower line to go under a tunnel. And we were in front of one of the giant churches of DC, the the Foundry Methodist Church, one of the historic churches. I know your dad preached there many years ago.
Absolutely.
And it stopped. And suddenly two young men from the protest crowd ran up the steps to the porch of the church holding two flags of Mexico, which has become the symbol of the immigrant rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they were waving the flags, and the crowd was cheering them on, chanting and singing and roaring with excitement. And then a young man wrote with a giant DC city flag, which has become the symbol of the city resistance to occupation, ran up to join them. And he was welcomed with big hugs, and people were waving the flags, and the crowd was chanting and singing. And then a man ran up with a giant Palestinian flag. And my first instinct was, oh God, this could be bad. Because for so many years, the issue of Palestine, even among progressives, was seen as dangerous. We're not ready yet. Our funders won't like it. Our supporters may balk at it. And I thought, oh God. And instead, he was welcomed with big hugs, and the crowd went bananas. The crowd began cheering and laughing, and it was an incredible moment. And that, I think, is where we are moving towards. That's becoming the new reality. And that's what gives us hope. The urgency of now makes it all much harder. But that's what we can move towards, that moment of a giant demonstration where Palestine is just one piece of what everybody agrees on.
Amen to that.
Amen to that.
Dr. Stephen Junius, University of San Francisco, produced by Kalila. There's Kalila, his daughter today. And of course, Phyllis Bennis, a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. Get the book, Understanding Palestine and Israel. Don't take it from me. Take it from Reverend Jesse Jackson. He said, very serious. He said, get the book, get the book. And, squeeze my hand. That was the endorsement. Almost, he's got a mean grip, everybody.
I can't ask for more than that.
And look, trust and believe. You have his stamp of approval. Because, at the end of the day, we all need to come together. And I'm praying for the people of the West Bank, the people of Israel, and Gaza, from the river to the sea. It all belongs to we. And we're going to have to come together, everybody. At the end of the day, we all have to pray for each other and pull for each other and pull together. For those Israelis who only care about the hostages coming back, I pray for the healing that I'm sure is to come their way, because they've got to love and pray for the Palestinians. I pray for those brokenhearted Palestinians who are going home, not to nothing but to rubble. I know, as a woman of faith, that God can restore, and God will restore. And will rebuild a Palestine that will be bigger and better and stronger and more just than ever before. That is my prayer. That is my prayer. And I know that we can get there. We all have to clean out our hearts, dig down, and do the work. I love you, everybody. Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I love you, Dr. Zunez. I love you, Phyllis Bennis. I love everybody here. God bless. Thank you all so much. This was